Hello and welcome to this latest episode of the Driving at Profit with Zero Emissions podcast. I am Barbara Albert, co-CEO of 100% Renewables, a consultancy specializing in the development of net zero strategies. Today we're speaking with Sydney Opera House, which will soon celebrate its 50-year anniversary. As a symbol of modern Australia, the nation's premier tourist destination and one of the world's busiest performing arts centres, the Opera House plays an integral role in Australia's identity. The state, national and World Heritage listed site is inscribed on the UNESCO World Heritage List as a masterpiece of human creative genius. In 2018, it was estimated to have a social asset value of $6.2 billion and make a $1.2 billion contribution to the Australian economy annually. The Opera House hosts more than 1,800 performances a year and welcomes almost 11 million people each year, with almost 1.5 million people seeing a show and more than 560,000 visitors taking a guided tour. The Opera House's reach is not limited to its geographic location. It is also an online portal for performances, creative learning, ideas and discussions, reaching audiences and communities nationally and internationally through a program of digital experiences. More than 900 people are employed, including 23 First Nations Australians. Joining me today is Emma Bombonato, an environmental science and management background with over 15 years experience as a practitioner in sustainability. Emma's experience spans across education and training in sustainability, sustainable resource management, carbon management, social behaviour change, organisational engagement and strategy development. Emma joined the Sydney Opera House in 2017 as the Manager Environmental Sustainability after 10 years with Taronga Conservation Society Australia, where Emma and I first met. Representing the Sydney Opera House, Emma is a member of the leadership panel of the City of Sydney Sustainable Destination Partnership and a member of the Heritage Council's Heritage Advisory Panel. Emma's role is to strategically support the Sydney Opera House to continue to take a leadership role in sustainability. Hi, Emma, and welcome to the Driving at Profit with Zero Emissions show.
Good morning, Barbara.
The Sydney Opera House is such an iconic landmark of Sydney. When people abroad think about Australia, one of the first things that would come to mind is the Sydney Opera House. And I remember watching documentaries about Australia when I still lived in Austria. And I was always so excited to see the beautiful Opera House perched at the gorgeous Sydney Harbour, the bridge next to it. And I imagined myself being there one day. And now I am fortunate to be able to call Sydney my home. So it's with great pleasure that I'm interviewing you today, Emma, on the sustainability journey of the Sydney Opera House. Now, the Opera House is now a carbon neutral organisation and it builds on a long history of embedding sustainability in its operations. I'm really keen to find out more. Let's start with your carbon footprint. You've got 900 employees and 11 million visitors each year. What kind of emissions is the Sydney Opera House responsible for?
Yeah, thanks, Barbara. We do. We have lots of things happening all throughout the year, and the Opera House is always really busy. So really our emissions profile every year accounts for about 16,000 tonnes of carbon. Actually, we've been working on that to reduce that over the last couple of years since 2018, down to around 12,500 tonnes in the last financial year. Our profile's made up primarily from electricity, water, waste that we use, transport, which includes international flights and domestic flights. And when I talk international, I'm talking mostly about a pre-COVID time, gas we use, and services that we provide, which would include, cleaning, telecommunications, and things like that.
Let's talk about your climate leadership and your targets. Now, a while ago, we've had the release of the IPCC Working Group 1 report and now the Working Group 2 report. Do the releases of those reports affect your strategy? And just generally speaking, what does showing up for climate mean for your organization?
Yeah, that's a really good and important question. I think for us, we have an environmental action plan. It's one of our 3 community plans, and it's currently in the last year of delivery of that plan. And we definitely pay close attention to reports like the IPC report, just to inform our strategy. And probably for me, it's getting me thinking more about what the next iteration or our fifth plan will look like. Really important for us to, of course, make sure that we're doing everything that we can, both in terms of being a responsible business and reducing our emissions over time. Also, leading by example, which is really important. The Sydney Opera House has always been renowned for leadership in sustainability. So we want to make sure that what we're doing in this space helps to lead by example and ensure that the community feel confident that we are responding to important issues like climate change. And we also like to make sure that we're focusing on where our greatest impact is. And that's often the reach of our audience. So it might be looking at our operational waste, but also operational emissions, but it's also about what we do, say, in our programming, in our education programs, and all of those messages that we can include to engage and inspire our audience around important issues like climate change. But climate action at the Opera House really wears very many different hats, which we can obviously talk about throughout this session today.
For sure. So you mentioned the environmental action plan. I had a look at your current action plan, and I saw that you have a large number of targets across energy and waste and sustainable event management. What are your exact climate targets?
Yeah, we do. When we first looked in this current environmental action plan, our main targets were to be carbon neutral, which we achieved in 2018. Actually, we decided to do that much earlier on than what we had originally planned, about 5 years earlier than our original target. And part of that was to also look at our emissions reduction. So we had a target of, we included a target to reduce our energy consumption by at least 20%. We really wanted to look at our waste footprint. So there was a bit of work to do from our third plan to increase our recycle rate and diversion of waste from landfill. We were looking at 50%, and we have the target to increase that to 85%. And then onwards from there, looking at things like our travel footprint, the amount of flights that we have every year is really important. The way that we can minimize our waste and resource use, for instance, paper use, we wanted to halve that. All of these things go into our emissions profile, so really important to focus holistically on what that looks like. And we also are thinking more about next steps from carbon neutrality, which is, from carbon neutrality, we want to achieve a net zero target by 2023. And then we want to move into being climate positive. It's our 50th anniversary next year, which is really exciting for the Opera House. And so it's really important for us to have ambitious goals so we can talk about what the future looks like in sustainability and then in climate leadership. So being climate positive is a really important part of that journey for us.
Oh, there's so many aspects that I want to delve into further. You mentioned the net zero by 2023 goal. What kind of differences do you see between your status as a carbon neutral organization and achieving net zero status?
Yeah, slightly nuanced difference for us. I mean, we have, as I mentioned, been carbon neutral since 2018. We achieved that by looking at emissions reduction in terms of our electricity footprint, our waste footprint, as I've already mentioned. I mean, over 80% of our total emissions profile is actually electricity use. We use a lot of electricity every year for heating and cooling the building, of course, and in our HVAC systems. So that is a really important focus for us to make sure that energy efficiency has been, something we've invested a lot of time, effort and money in over the last 10 years. But we then have our residual emissions, which through carbon neutral certification with Climate Active, we offset that each year and have been doing that since 2018. So, and we do that through the purchase of certified projects. And then we achieve the carbon neutral certification year on year. So net zero for us is more about looking at genuine reduction in our scope 2 electricity emissions. So looking at fossil fuel electricity, making sure that we're also reducing our other areas of our footprint as much as we can. And then by 2023, we do hope to be completely net zero, and then looking at our residual emissions, which should be a much smaller proportion of our overall footprint to then offset. That's the plan at the moment.
Yeah, what a great strategy to pursue both, to have the carbon neutral status and to work towards net zero. And so your carbon offset purchases minimize over time and you're focusing more on your own operations and your supply chain. Is fantastic. Another goal you mentioned previously is that you want to be climate positive. How do you intend to achieve that and what does it mean for you?
Well, this is really important, talking about climate positive, because, it's something that I often think about. What does the future look like? When we were planning our fourth environmental action plan, it was very much about how do we make sure that we're still maintaining a leadership position, so we're inspiring the community as much as we can. We do feel that, after we get to our net zero, after we meet that goal and we get to being we've got climate positive as our next, big thing. It's more holistic, I think. I think it's a way that I'm planning it at the moment and talking about and engaging with our staff is, how do we talk about a strategy that incorporates our new Centre for Creativity, which it has education programs from kids all the way up to tertiary, which talks about climate embedded into that, into the narrative. How do we look at programming, which already happens at the Opera House? Just last week we had this really great new program called SOH Build. It's at the moment it's a tertiary program, and it's very much about the United Nations global goals, and one of the focuses or the design challenges was squarely on taking climate action in the built environment. So for us, being positive is more about the positive messages, as well as the fact that obviously from a building and operational perspective, we want to be able to be, having that positive impact in terms of our emissions profile.
It's almost like causing a wider reach, so making sure that you're tracking towards net zero, but then taking it out into the world and affecting greater change through the activities that you undertake.
Exactly. So the way that we're thinking about it and we define it will be that exactly what you've said. The positivity is about the reach that we can achieve through, our supply chain, through our staff engagement, through our audience strategy. It will be embedded all the way through all of the different strategies, the way we talk to our visitors, whether we can build in, climate action related messages into, our experiences for people to come on site. So everywhere you look, those messages will be nicely weaved into the experience. So you really get a sense that you're coming to a place that obviously is a World Heritage listed site. It's an amazing, iconic building. From an architectural and design perspective, it's a wow, but it's also about the fact that we very obviously take sustainability and climate action seriously.
You definitely do, because previously you mentioned that you went for the certification of carbon neutrality 5 years earlier than your original planned date. How did that come about? 5 years is pretty substantial achievement ahead of time. So how did that happen? How did you gain the internal traction, support from your execs, etc.?
Yeah, that's a really great question. And it was one of those conversations that we had when we were developing the new environmental action plan about how can we make sure that we are really positioning climate action as important. There was an opportunity for us to look at, the work that we'd done on reducing our emissions over time. We'd seen, a 16% reduction in our electricity use as a result of an upgrade of our, central plant chillers that are responsible for helping us heat and cool the building. We implemented a building management control system, which helps with the building's performance in terms of, monitoring energy use and making sure that the building is used smarter. And we thought we are in a pretty good place to be able to go for certification. It also really aligned nicely with our ambition to be a 5-star Green Star rated building with the GBCA. We wanted to simultaneously achieve that goal as well. And because they were so nicely aligned, we thought it's the perfect moment to go for that goal.
It must be so hard because it is heritage listed. There must have been so many challenges. What kind of challenges did you face and how did you overcome them?
Yes, I mean, we are a World Heritage listed building. So, heritage is one of the most important things we have to do. We look at the building and make sure that we're respecting that heritage with everything in terms of our operation and the design and new builds. But, it also wasn't that hard for us to find ways to, upgrade equipment and services in the building and integrate technology, which allowed us to use the building more efficiently, and then still also maintain our heritage commitments. And sometimes, and more often than not, actually, our heritage and sustainability commitments go hand in hand. So a great example of that might be retaining existing heritage fabric or materials, which obviously have a better outcome for us because we retain things to be repurposed. So they definitely speak to each other, and there are certainly challenges where we find the balance, but I think in terms of being 5-star, it was much more about the operations and how we improved our performance over time, reduced our emissions, and looked at things that any business can do, the way that we procure goods and services and materials, and making sure that, sustainable thinking is embedded into the planning phases of the way we purchase goods and the way do we deliver services and our experiences.
Going back to that previous statement where originally electricity made up such a big proportion of your carbon footprint, and then you worked on improving your energy efficiency, you were able to reduce your emissions by 16%. And I think you were also one of the first organizations in Australia to enter into a renewable energy power purchase agreement. And I think that was 4 years ago. The landscape for power purchase agreements looked very different back then, and now it seems to be easier to be entering into those agreements. What would you be able to share with our listeners as to the challenges you faced when you first set it up, your experience with the power purchase agreements, and any plans moving forward for that renewable energy power purchasing, given that electricity makes up such a big proportion of your carbon footprint and one of the biggest levers you have available? So please tell us more about that.
Yeah, it's a really great question. And you're right, power purchase agreements, or PPAs at the time, were very new on the scene. We hadn't seen many examples of them. University of New South Wales, I think, had one previous to us, and there were a couple of schools and other areas where we were seeing them. So I guess for us, our electricity supply agreement came up for renewal. Of course, whenever any contract comes up for renewal, it's a great opportunity to think about, well, how can we do this in a new and different and innovative way to get the benefits that we were looking for, which was to really support the transition of New South Wales and Australia towards renewable energy projects. We obviously, it's important to look for value for money. So that was an important driver for us. And we wanted to have social benefits, of course, by supporting projects that were local and in New South Wales as well. And part of the business case, and one of the most important things I would say, is to have that conversation about strategically what you're trying to achieve, obviously thinking about the triple bottom line as well, making sure that all of those align with each other and support each other, and having a conversation with our chief financial officer, who was hugely supportive of the idea of moving into a PPA as a sort of new model for electricity supply. Also, the long-term contract gives you some stability in terms of the electricity prices. At the time, the electricity prices were quite volatile. That was a risk that we identified, and we wanted to make sure that we were using the PPA as a risk mitigation strategy as well as anything else. So there were quite a lot of boxes that the PPA ticked for us, as well as the fact that, of course, we wanted to use that to be able to talk about the transition to renewables, decarbonisation, and making sure that it was part of our, journey towards net zero and being climate positive.
Are there any specific learnings you could share with other organisations that are looking to go down the renewable energy power purchasing path?
Look, the landscape has changed so much since we first started our process of testing the market to see what was available. I know there's lots of different models that are available now, and it has become more flexible for different organisations. I mean, we were quite a small organisation compared to a lot of the larger PPAs that had been around, and I understand that there are a lot more availability of that now, which is a great thing. I think just making sure that you have that early on conversation about what you're trying to achieve, and having a good benchmark. I mean, we benchmarked our electricity supply costs against what we called, our business as usual, and we wanted to make sure that we were performing equal to or better than that. And so far, we monitor how our performance is going, and it's doing well. and we just keep the conversation, you know, on the radar. I think we've become, in many ways, one of the benefits of our PPA is becoming more conscious electricity consumers. We know at times when the spot price market is high, I certainly keep almost daily, you know, contact with what's happening in the marketplace. I understand a lot better about, you know, the national energy network, and, you know, how all of the different elements, including even, you know, external factors like the weather and other impacts from other states, can impact on our electricity supply use and cost. So I think that's probably one of the things I would say, just be more conscious, have conversations about it, and you know, have conversations early on with your executive team to make sure that actually there's more benefits associated with PPAs, particularly from our position, than there would be risks.
Yeah, wonderful, because it's certainly an initiative like that increases climate literacy and energy literacy across the organization, or at least the people that are closely working on that project. Now, one of the other emission sources you mentioned previously is waste. And going back to Environmental Action Plan, you say that you've prevented 2.2 million straws and 90,000 plastic bags or bags and 30,000 cups from entering landfill by reducing single-use plastic across the precinct. How did you achieve that? What was the journey? How did you engage with everyone to make this a reality? It's a wonderful achievement. How did you do it?
Oh, this was a great project. We started this by making sure that we initially had a target in our environmental action plan to reduce single-use plastic across the site by 25%. And then at the same time, quite fortuitously, the War on Waste series came out on the ABC with Craig Rucastle, and that was a perfect moment because the conversation was about, you know, single-use coffee cups, it was about plastic straws and plastic bags. And so we used that moment to sort of leverage the conversation because there was a greater amount of awareness within our staff, but also within our supply chain with our tenants. And also on top of that, which was super helpful and supportive, is the City of Sydney came out with a Sydney Doesn't Suck campaign. So we were able to, I guess, join forces in a collaboration of sorts to have a conversation around why venues should reduce and remove plastic straws from their venues. And we had some great leadership from our tenants, you know, including the Opera Bar. We know that in terms of the amount of straws that were being used in a year were over 1 million just from one of our venues. And in terms of that, getting to that 2.2 million, it was literally about turning off the tap and saying from August of that year, there will be no plastic straws that will be served. You have paper straws, and of course we have to consider accessibility needs as well. But all of the tenants that we worked with were super supportive, on board. We have paper ones, and plastic bags was working with our retail. We switched over. And then we had this really great opportunity within Antidote Festival, which is one of the festivals that we have every year to talk about environmental and social sustainability issues. We had an artist who commissioned a really great piece of art and used all of the leftover straws to make plastic island art. And we were able to talk about that as well. So we had some community engagement work and some help with that whole process. But yes, it literally was probably about 8 months worth of conversations. And then we just said, if this is coming, it aligns with what's happening out there in the wider world in terms of F&B venues, and it was done.
So would you say then it's a matter of creating engagement right at the start and to bring everyone along the journey, get the buy-in, and then roll out the initiative?
Absolutely. It's always the conversations at the beginning always are about, you know, selling the why, you know, a compelling reason. And for us, you know, the Opera House is right on the edge of Sydney Harbour. We really talk about how important our marine environment is, how much we love Sydney Harbour being our backyard, and the impacts associated with single-use plastic in the marine environment. So I think when you start framing the conversation with that sort of reason, it becomes very clear to people that, you know, you're doing something really good and beneficial for the environment, and it makes it very hard for us to say people won't want to support it. And obviously we provide an enabling support and help if we need to make it easier for, our tenants to transition into a new way of operating. But the cups as well, I think you asked Barbara before about the 30,000 cups. That was a pilot that we introduced for Vivid to make sure that we were introducing reusable drinkware into our festivals and shows. That's a continued work on progress. So we certainly haven't, nailed it right off the bat straight away. We're still continuing with reusable drinkware in our shows and in our festivals and outdoor concerts because, COVID created a few additional issues with, keep cups and reusable drinkware and things like that. But we are seeing slowly a move back into the ability for us to do that, which is really positive.
Great. And you mentioned previously that the marine environment that surrounds the Sydney Opera House. When I was doing research for our interview, I saw how you in combination with the university, you built these artificial structures to mimic a reef environment. Can you tell us more about that?
We did. This is another one of my favourite projects. We worked with the University of Technology, so two great researchers, Dr. David Booth and Gigi Beretta, on this project. It was actually a grant from the New South Wales government, and it was to install artificial reef structures in order to augment areas that had been an existing seawall. So an artificial seawall is evident around the Sydney Opera House, and that is linked to a decline in biodiversity. So the purpose of the research was to see whether those artificial structures could create habitat and bring back juvenile fish species. And we installed that along the eastern seawall in around 2018. It's been in now for a couple of years, and we still have monthly or quarterly now monitoring of those structures. And as a result of the introduction of the reef structures, we've seen around 8 more fish species in the area, which is great. And even, I have to say, last year we saw a seal hanging around. Usually we have a seal that loves to haul out on the northern Broadwalk. There's a little stair there where you will often see him sunbaking and just having a rest, but we've spotted him or her around the eastern side, and I'm often saying he's got a bit more choice now for his menu. So it's really nice to see. Often hanging out on a sunny day, you can see anything from stingrays and small fish, schooling fish. It's really lovely, actually.
I can already picture the next generation of Austrians watching documentaries about Australia and the Opera House, and a picture of the seal. That's amazing. So one of the other emission sources of your carbon footprint is cleaning and chemicals. Obviously, that's an important consideration for a venue such as yours. So when I was doing research, I saw this great little video on your webpage that shows how your cleaning staff is using olive oil to clean the rails and the concrete rather than using harsh chemicals. And can you tell us more about this story?
Yes, so this was a story that we spoke about more broadly when we achieved a 4-star Green Star rating, and it was a really important part of looking at our chemical use on site and, as you say, ensuring that it's not toxic for people that use it and also for the environment. As a heritage listed building, we have materials which include bronze, concrete, timber and glass, which need to be looked after for perpetuity. We don't want to replace or need to replace them, so we have to look after them as best we can and maintain them. So one of our cleaning staff members, who has since retired, his name was Steve Sakalis, he has Greek heritage and actually had these amazing ideas about just simply using cleaning products that you would find in your home, like olive oil, bicarb soda, soap flakes and detergent, and creating recipes that really help to actually clean the building fabric but also protected as well from using harsh chemicals. And so that has been super successful. The Opera House spent a lot of time, you know, testing it through our heritage maintenance crew, and we have adopted those recipes, and we still use them today, even after, you know, Steve has retired. So it's a very important and lovely legacy that he's left us.
Fantastic. So we've talked a lot about your emissions reduction initiatives, how you've reduced electricity consumption, how you've switched to renewables, your initiatives around waste and initiatives around cleaning. So there's lots of different reduction measures. But to get to a carbon neutral status, there is, as you mentioned before, the purchase of carbon offsets to nil out the residual carbon footprint. Can you tell us more about how you decide internally on what offsets to purchase? Because obviously that's an annual exercise. What process do you go through to determine which to purchase? What are your preferences? What offset projects do you support?
Yeah, definitely. We have this conversation, as you mentioned, every year to decide which projects that we hope to support. And often, I mean, they have to be firstly certified projects in order for us to achieve climate active certification. So that's really important. And we will look mostly, if we can, for projects in Australia. So Australian carbon credit units, you know, there are projects that we have used that support First Nations projects in the Northern Territory. We will look at biodiversity related projects. We will look for projects where there are co-benefits, so making sure that we can link our offsetting with, you know, planting projects that might be happening in New South Wales, but we will also look for overseas credits as well, so renewable energy or ones that are linked to social benefits, and particularly keeping an eye out on ones that are really nicely aligned with the UN Sustainable Development Goals. That's important for us. And we look at, I think it's important to say we do look at international projects, because, you know, I think the developed nations can do a lot for supporting developing countries where, you know, we can invest in projects and communities overseas that, you know, need our help as well. So that it is very important for us to do that.
And so you've got carbon neutral status as an organization. We've recently helped the Powerhouse Museum achieve carbon neutrality for their 100 Climate Conversations event. Is that on the cards for you as well, to go carbon neutral for your events as well, or will you stay with the organization certification?
Yes, the short answer is yes. We are looking at certification at the moment for our events and festivals, including our main event that happens every year, Vivids Live. That's really important. We have previously been carbon neutral for that event, but seeking to look at the opportunity where we can to be certified for every event. That is also part of a project that we're working on for the next couple of years, to achieve certification for sustainable event management to that international standard. We do have our own events on site. There is a lot of events and performances that happen throughout the year, so we do strategically choose the ones where we think we can have the most impact.
That makes sense. You also mentioned the Sustainable Development Goals, and I can see SDG 13 and the support that you have for that goal behind you as your background. So SDGs, I know, are a super important consideration for the Sydney Opera House. How do you integrate the SDGs in your operations? How did you go about defining what your core focus would be on the SDGs, and just generally about your SDG journey?
Yes, the goals are very important to us across everything that we do. And I mentioned earlier when we were talking about the Environmental Action Plan that the Environmental Action Plan is one of 3 community plans. We have an environment plan, a reconciliation plan, and an accessibility plan. And those 3 go together as our community plans. We also have a new diversity, inclusion, and belonging strategy as well. And when we had the conversation about, you know, the importance of aligning with the global goals, it really helped us to be able to find a way to connect those community plans with a higher purpose, or a framework that allowed us to talk less traditionally and in silos about, environmental sustainability, and more about sustainability more holistically. Social sustainability to the Opera House is just as important as environmental sustainability. The community is just as important to us as looking after the environment. So the goals provided that framework. And so when we presented that concept to align with the global goals, that was the reason why. Leadership is not just environmental sustainability, it is all about, social, environment and economic, and the 17 goals do that for us in a framework that speaks a global language, and to be able to communicate what we do across Australia and globally is really important, and the global goals allow us to do that, I think, in the most effective and impactful way. So I guess, on to your next part of your question was around how do we embed that each of our plans now, including our new strategic plans, our new artistic strategy, a visitor engagement strategy. They're all mapped to the each of the goals and the ones where we feel we can have the most impact. And that's about 9 or 10 of the goals at the moment, but we will continue to pick up goals where we feel that our particular strategy or plan really aligns to it and has impact in that way.
And I can see in your background picture that you picked SDG 13. Is that a personal favorite of yours?
That is, if anyone ever asks me what my global goal is, my hero goal, I call it, it's definitely climate action, because I think that we need to be talking about it. The pace at which we need to be transitioning away and decarbonising is so important that it should be at the forefront of most of my conversations on a daily basis.
And we talked a lot previously about your engagement strategies and how it is really important for you to bring stakeholders along on the journey and to engage with them early, to get their buy-in and to push initiatives through. So I'd like to dive a bit deeper into your engagement strategy. We touched previously on tenants such as the Opera Bar, one of my favorite bars. So you have a number of tenants though, so maybe can you talk us through the kind of tenants you have and who they are and how you have gone with getting the support? We've had a bit of a glimpse on how you go about this, but perhaps there are further insights that you could share with us.
Yeah, well, across our venues we have different operators. So we have, as you mentioned, Opera Bar and Trippers White Group and Benelong restaurant as our premier restaurant. They are all different tenants who work on site with us, obviously, and we need to work in collaboration every day in terms of being able to achieve all of our goals across the organisation, but that includes our environmental action plans. And we have a really great collaborative working relationship. I've never had a conversation where there isn't appetite to want to be able to do things more or better or improve the way that we do work together. And I think one of the things that my role provides is enabling support to make it easier to be able to achieve an objective that we're working on. So yes, it's very much a partnership in a way that we collaborate, identify issues. Of course, it's not all rosy all of the time. We do have challenges that we need to work through, and we have a really great team of food and beverage. Our food and beverage team is really proactive and very much engaged with sustainability and our other community programs as well. So it's always a good and healthy conversation when we want to be doing new things, more things, and trying to make sure that, we're achieving the goals in our plan.
How do you communicate with each other? Do you have regular meetings that you have, or how do you go about that?
Yeah, well, I can give you a real example of, our waste performance. We meet monthly to talk about how we're going with our tenants, and that is looking at, measuring and monitoring performance of individual tenants. We work closely with Key Clean, who are our waste and cleaning contractors, and they are super proactive at just having those daily interactions, having a conversation with the head chef or with the staff to make sure, hey, do you need more bins because we noticed that you've got, a busy night tonight. How can we help make sure that, you're separating your waste? Is there any issues? And then monthly, we more strategically sit down and look at, have there been any issues in the month? How can we help? What can we do to improve performance? And we have seen, some marked and significant changes in just general engagement. When you start talking, when you've got the data in front of you to show what the performance looks like, recycling rates have definitely moved up from, anywhere between 40% all the way up to now. We average around 85% across all of our tenants, which is, they do an exceptional job, which, is a really great story for us.
It seems you're doing an exceptional job in engaging your tenants, also tying back again to the SDGs, with probably SDG 17, the partnership goal, being one of your most important ones as well. So that seems to be an amazing initiative. And it also seems that you've got the data to support it. So it's not just talk, talk, talk. You have the data, you're capturing it, you're using it to guide the conversation. So I think that's a great initiative, because you can't really manage what you don't measure.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And I would say on that, one of the things that we did with the waste performance was we were able to demonstrate where there was savings available, and for businesses that are obviously interested in making sure that, they're getting the greatest amount of value, to be able to save money by recycling better is an obvious win. And so it's not just about, wanting to make sure that we're capturing all your, container deposit scheme containers and bottles, because there's an actual benefit there for you. And so that makes it makes the conversation much easier as well.
For sure. So that brings me to the next question. Do you then take the same engagement approach that you use with your tenants to your suppliers? Because you mentioned your waste contractors, you mentioned your cleaning contractors. So these are all emissions that come in from your supply chains or purchase goods and services. Can you tell us more about your supply chain engagement strategy?
Yeah, so we do have obviously a large supply chain, and we also have, our resident contractors who work with us on site as well. And so we look at opportunities, within those contracts to build in sustainability requirements. So that's one part of it, to make sure that every time we're looking at a contract, what can we do to make, to strengthen, I suppose, the requirements that are in that contract, but then also making sure that we maintain relationships with our supply chain regularly, and have regular suppliers to develop a relationship with, and also making sure, when we go out to tender for new suppliers, for instance, whether it's the Opera House or whether it's through our, tier 1 suppliers, that we're embedding those sustainability requirements into the contracts, which is important.
And what about your customers, all the visitors that come to see your shows and come to your venue? How are you engaging with them? You mentioned a few examples previously, but can you tell us more about how it flows into your engagement strategy with the customers, whether you're trying to integrate sustainability themes into your performances, perhaps? What can you tell us about that?
We definitely do. We try and make sure, in terms of the communications for an event, that, the journey for them for sustainability starts when they purchase their ticket. So there'll be messaging within the ticket. A really great example is one of our own events, which is, Vivid Live, where we remind people that, to catch public transport, to bring your own water bottle, don't forget your keep cup. Sustainability is important to the Opera House. So it's very much a two-way street in terms of us trying to do what we can to reduce our footprint and emissions, but also having people that come to the site that know that, this is the kind of venue that we are, and these issues are important to us. We also love feedback. So whenever there's an opportunity to get feedback from our customers and audiences, about things that we can do better, then that's really great for us to have those learnings and conversations. And within our own programming, we definitely look at ways to embed the messaging. I mentioned before the Centre for Creativity and our Children and Families programming. There is very often environmentally themed messages, whether it's about, looking after the environment or caring for each other or climate related types of programming. And in our other creative programming as well, we had a really great installation for Sydney Festival. I'm not sure whether many people were able to see it on site, but it was called Thor, and it was by Legs on the Wall, which is an artistic performance installation where it was around 3 tons of ice was suspended over the Opera House via a crane, and it had interpretive dancers on it for a couple of days telling the story about, time is running out for climate. And it was such an interesting installation to stand there and watch people interact with it and have conversations about what is this, what does it mean, it's talking about climate. And complementary to that was an Opera House organised event called Thaw Enough Talk, and that was the opportunity. It was a soapbox style talk, and it was about inviting key members of Australian climate leaders and also the Australian community to come and talk, about issues that they feel really passionate about. So they're just a couple of examples of the way that we want to engage with our audiences on these issues, and also make sure that, at the same time we're raising awareness about, I guess, what the expectation of us as a sustainable venue is.
And what about your staff internally? Because sustainability seems to permeate the whole organization. And I've seen pictures of the green t-shirts, your green champions, I think they're called SEALs. So how is sustainability perceived internally, and do you have green champions? What kinds of activities do you undertake? Can you tell us more about that?
We do. We have staff engagement throughout the year, and that's all sorts of different types of engagement through our community groups. We have wonderful community groups. We have a Pride community group, a Reconciliation Action community group, accessibility and environmental sustainability, just to name a few, diversity, inclusion and belonging group as well. And we all get together from time to time to talk about, what we can do as a community of practice to engage across the organisation, our staff. But SEALs stands for Sustainable Environmental Action Leaders, and it's a bit of a homage to who we call Benny the Seal, who I mentioned before, hauls out on the Northern Boardwalk steps. And we have around 30 SEALs across the site, across all different portfolios, and they are people who volunteer their time to get engaged with activities throughout the year. It might be Clean Up Australia Day, World Environment Day, Earth Hour, Plastic Free July, Walk to Work Day. There's a whole bunch of things that happen throughout the year where SEALs are responsible for helping engage other staff, raising awareness. We also have lunch and learns where a SEAL, a member of that group, might host an event. We're talking about, being waste wise, or very recently we had one on looking at how you can invest ethically and looking at your super to take greater climate action. And also just, tips and tricks that we do throughout the year through other events that help SEALs be more involved and own part of the plan in terms of making sure that we've got really great engagement across the organisation.
I can see that really happening in action. That's fantastic. So we're almost out of time, but I do want to touch on another important topic, being climate risk. So before COVID hit, we experienced really bad wildfires in Australia, which caused extraordinary damage. And now in 2022, it doesn't seem like the rain will ever stop on the East Coast, and it's raining now. We've had so many people lose their homes to flooding. And back in Austria, where I'm from, my parents tell me that it hasn't rained in such a long time. Everything's really dry, nothing is growing. And recently, temperatures in Antarctica were 40 degrees Celsius above the long-term average, which is so worrying. It seems to me that the impact of climate change can now truly be felt. It's not a distant thing, it's here. And that's currently with roughly 1 degree of warming across the globe. So given the close location to the harbour, can you tell us a bit more about the physical climate risks that would be most relevant to you guys? And how have you gone about assessing these, and how is it informing your strategy going forward?
Yes, it's so true. And I guess that takes me back to the reason why, my hero goal is goal 13, climate action, because one of the ways that, I deal with that is by making sure that, I'm working in a role that helps to, progress the agenda and become more actively involved in climate action. And climate risk is an important one for us. It's definitely part of our plan to make sure that we first understand what the risks are over time and what that looks like in terms of scenario modelling. So last year we worked with the New South Wales Government Climate Risk Ready program, and we were part of a pilot where we looked at the operation across the site with our key stakeholders. So everyone from event management, food and beverage, supply chain, building operations, infrastructure, obviously myself, security, safety. There are a lot of us involved to understand what those risks would be to different scenarios. So extreme heat, extreme cold, storms, and severe weather. And we were able to distill the risks down in a couple of workshops to really looking at, okay, well, the immediate risk is just to better understand what types of scenarios that we're dealing with, given that we are in the location that we are. Severe weather, heavy rain, as you have mentioned, looking at storm surges, sea level rise, all of those elements. And I think part of that has just been really about making sure that we prioritise those types of risks in opportunities for new planning. So we looked at a couple of areas. The experience of our patrons and our audience. We looked at the building operations and the risks to that. We looked at the infrastructure of the building over the long term. I mean, one of the most important parts of what we do is to renew and treasure the Opera House for future generations. So very important. And we also looked at safety as well. And we've identified that, as I mentioned, there's great opportunity for us to think about climate risk and resilience and embedding that into future capital works programs, looking at our strategic building plans, making sure that it's first and foremost considered as part of scope of new works, and also where we need to adapt by, looking at services that might need to be moved or changed. And just really at the moment about gathering data, what happens when it rains, as it has been at the moment, and how does that impact the building, and making sure that we are keeping a really great records so we can see trends over time, which has been really important part of that conversation.
The question lots of people will probably ask themselves is the Opera House safe from sea level rise?
Yes, and of course, that's the first and foremost. And I would say at the moment, we have got an amazing group of people who look after the Opera House, not only internally, but also external engineers. And that is absolutely part of the agenda and what they're there to do. So rest assured, that is part of our mission and at the future of our capital works and renewal program.
So we've talked so much about your current and immediate next steps, and I was wondering what your future will look like, because you're working on so many amazing initiatives. What's next in terms of your sustainability journey? What does the future for the Sydney Opera House look like?
Yes, that's a great question. It's exciting because we're leading up to the end of our current environmental action plan. So we're starting to think about what the next 3 or 4 years should look like. It's the Opera House's 50th year anniversary next year. So there will be lots of great activities and moments for celebration. Climate, being net zero and climate positive, and our pathway towards 2030 is definitely a part of that. We are very much hoping to move from being a 5-star Green Star rated building to a 6-star rated building, which is equivalent to global leadership in sustainability from the Green Building Council of Australia. That is really important for us. And also just making sure that we are talking about environmental and social sustainability, because we know obviously that the sustainability is much as about people and the planet, and having those conversations together, because that is, quite honestly the expectation of our community as well leading into the future.
So having heard all that, what's the key takeaway message you want to leave our listeners with?
I think there's a couple of takeaways for me, which I think are really important. So one is the need to measure our footprint or impact and performance, because, as you mentioned earlier, we can't manage what we don't measure. That's really important. Data helps us make all of the decisions and informs all of our good decisions in terms of our strategy. So that is really important. I think enabling and engaging people. So we know that people and, the people that work in our supply chain and our tenants, they're the powerhouses for change. It's actually the people operationally that really help progress and move things forward. So engagement is so key to that. And as you mentioned, Global Goal 17, partnerships for the goals and collaboration. I mean, you can't achieve these things on our own, and the Opera House knows that we need to work in collaboration with each other cultural institutions who are doing great work, like the Australian Museum, the Powerhouse Museum, the Art Gallery. We're all working together on sustainability, and that's really important part of what we do. And sharing our success. I'm really in a lucky position that I'm I have a dedicated role in sustainability. It's my job, but not every business necessarily has a sustainability person. So it's a really important for me and for us that we share knowledge, share advice, talk about challenges, obviously help each other and enable each other to do well and progress sustainability and create larger impact. So hopefully for us, sharing our journey inspires others to change as well. So that's a really important part of what the future will look like.
What a wonderful takeaway message. Thank you. So you're such an inspiring sustainability leader. What if people want to find out more? Is there a way to connect with you?
There certainly is. You can always find me on LinkedIn. And if anyone has any questions or they're interested in parts of what I've talked about today or just generally about a sustainability program, that's available on our website. And also you can email sustainability@sydneyoperahouse.com and I will, get back to you as best as I can with a response to your questions.
That's great. We'll pop those links into the show notes. I'm afraid that's all we have time for today. It was such an inspiring interview. Thank you so much for giving up your time, Emma.
Thanks, Barbara. Thanks so much for having me.
That was Emma Bombonato, Manager Environmental Sustainability at the Sydney Opera House, talking about their journey towards net zero emissions. If you know another person you think would enjoy this podcast, please let them know so that more people can hear about best practice stories of how organizations are moving to net zero emissions. Thanks for tuning in, and I'll see you in the next episode.